there, the pastor started to do what adult pedophiles do with younger people, which is starting to spend time with them, casually watch TV with him and lay his legs on him, and then ask him to massage him, and then start explaining to him how special he was to him, and it was special for the bishop to be able to spend time with them. They did devotional readings together. He was over there on a regular basis at this house. Eventually, it turned into such a relationship that the bishop had a ceremony with Anthony Flagg called a covenant. Within that covenant, it was essentially a marriage ceremony where there was candles, exchange of jewelry, and biblical quotes given in order for Anthony to know and for the bishop to tell him, I will always have your back and you will always have mine. He would use biblical stories to talk about how important it was to follow your leader and your master, and let him know that the acts that he was engaged in were not necessarily meaning that he was a homosexual or that either of them was, but rather the pastor, Bishop Long, was releasing his passion and his love for Anthony. Meantime, we have Maurice Robinson, and while Anthony's living in this house, he's bought a Mustang car, he's given money, he is on the payroll of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, as reflected by the federal tax returns, and he starts to travel with the bishop. He goes to the W Hotel in New York Times Square. He goes to the W Hotel in Dallas, where Anthony specifically remembers that he saw the zoo in town and that he wished he had gone to the zoo. But instead, on that trip, he accompanied the bishop everywhere the bishop went, including sharing a bed in the same hotel room on that trip and many others. They join this church, and the next thing he knows, he starts to immediately get to know the bishop. And the bishop, this is a very handsome young man, very charismatic young man, who wants nothing more to do what a lot of young African-American males want to do, like their idols of being in the music business, perhaps. And he introduces him to famous people. He meets T.I., he meets Chris Tucker, he meets Tyler Perry. He meets all kinds of famous people in the company of Bishop Long. And Bishop Long gives him a car. In fact, Bishop Long lets him drive his Bentley automobile. That's right, Bishop Long has a Bentley, or the church does, whoever owns it, and allows a young man at 17, 18 years old to drive it around. The feeling of power. And he gives him money, and he puts him on the New Birth Missionary payroll, which again will be reflected by the 1040 forms that he received. And in fact, Anthony has just in the accounting and the payroll over $11,000 of payments on the payroll from New Birth Church as an employee of a 17 or 18-year-old young man. And that's not counting the cash, the gifts, and the trips. He too went on a number of trips, but for Maurice, he was a little bit tougher because his mother and father were both in his life, and yet his mother recounts how the bishop, she thought there was nothing better for her son in their entire life to be handpicked as a personal attendant around the bishop. Crossing the line in which you have sexual contact of any sort with your parishioners, and particularly vulnerable young men that you're supposed to protect. It's our belief that these two are just two of the brave ones who are willing to come forward. And I'm going to tell you now, y'all are going to be chasing them around for interviews, and I'm not putting them through that. For them to sit down and reach out and tell me what happened, and it is the gory details in this complaint of the sexual acts that occurred, is more than enough, and we did not hide their names. This is not a John Doe lawsuit. But at the same time, they don't need to be in front of cameras. They will tell this in a deposition, and they will tell it to a judge.
He promised. He promised. He promised. He promised. I don't know who I'm talking to up in here, but I'm here to tell you, he promised. He getting somebody who wants to stand on his promise. This is an unconditional promise. All things, I'm talking to somebody. I'm talking to somebody up in this house. He promised. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. It ain't over. It ain't over. It ain't over. I'm talking to somebody. It ain't over. It ain't over. That's part of your anointing. God had to get the anointing out of you. You ask